Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and it's Saturday afternoon. Time for the injury report for Week 13. After all of these player news and updates, I will give you my final rankings at all 5 positions for Week 13. We're going to hop in. This time I'm going to go game by game. We've already seen 8 teams already play, and they are not involved in this video. But there are no teams on bye to mention. In Atlanta, the kicker Younghoe Koo is questionable with a hip injury. He is expected to play, but may not be 100%. I don't think it'll be that big of a problem, but Younghoe Koo, the only player on the injury report. Darnell Mooney did exit the game 2 weeks ago before the bye, but he's fine. Darnell Mooney is good to go. In LA for the Chargers, J.K. Dobbins is out. He exited last week on Monday night with a knee injury, and he's not going to play this week. So Gus Edwards will get the start. I think on the goal line is where Gus offers the most value. He's not a pass catcher, and this matchup is actually pretty good in that department. So Kimani Vidal gets the upgrade there. I think Kimani may catch a few passes if Quentin Johnston has lost all of his trust. There might be some checkdowns for Kimani Vidal, but I don't think I'm starting either Chargers running back with confidence. I think Gus is the only one who merits flex consideration. In the tight end room, though, Hayden Hurst was placed on IR, so while we were already starting Will Dissly, there's no longer any concerns that Hurst might be vulturing snaps from him. I don't expect Hayden Hurst back on the field until probably the playoffs. At this point, Will Dissly is clearly the guy, and he's basically the number 2 target behind Lad McConkey. I think Herbert trusts Dissly the most in LA. In Pittsburgh, their offense, other than rookie wide receiver Roman Wilson, is fully healthy, so if you're planning to start a Steeler this week, go ahead. They'll be fine. In Cincinnati, Zach Moss and Eric All Jr., the tight end, are on IR. They've been on IR for several weeks now. Otherwise, everyone else for Cincinnati is healthy. In Arizona, the Cardinals are fully healthy on offense as well. Only kicker Matt Prater, who's been on IR for weeks now, is unavailable. In Minnesota, tight end Josh Oliver is out for the second week in a row. So he was vulturing some touches from TJ Hockenson before going down, and with him off the field, I do expect Hockenson to get another 8+ targets. Hockenson is a very safe tight end, especially with Oliver off the field. So that's the update in Minnesota. In New England, Demario Douglas is questionable with an ankle injury, but I do expect him to play. He was limited all week in practice. However, I don't trust really any Patriots receiver. Perhaps with this injury, Kendrick Bourne is a bit more interesting, but it's really a tight end type of passing game. Other than Hunter Henry, Austin Hooper is probably the most interesting fantasy asset in New England, other than the running back, Ramondre Stevenson, I guess. But in Indianapolis, Josh Downs, the receiver, is out for this game, and that means Michael Pittman will be the de facto number 1 target, probably for the second week in a row. A.D. Mitchell, I think, also gets an upgrade without Josh Downs because Alec Pierce missed both Wednesday and Thursday in practice, did not practice at all with a foot injury. But Pierce did return on Friday. He was full in practice, and that is probably a sign he will play. So maybe don't trust A.D. Mitchell that much, but he is a little bit more interesting now without Josh Downs. Michael Pittman, I think, would be the safest play. We know both Pierce and Mitchell have some deep down the field upside. Pierce has been the guy, though, who's hit on those passes more so than anyone else. So I would maybe pivot to Pierce if I was desperate. I think Michael Pittman is a safe flex play, though. In New York for the Jets, Breece Hall questionable this week with a knee injury. Off the bye, he did not practice on Wednesday. Not the best sign. But on Thursday, he was limited, and then on Friday, he was full. So trending in the right direction. I have no concerns. I do think Breece Hall will play. That's what I'm expecting him to do. So start him. If you got him, he's always in your lineup. Breece Hall is a top 15 running back at worst. But Allen Lazard is on IR still. He's not coming back, and that means beyond Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams, maybe Malachi Corley does step up. Rookies sometimes play more off the bye week. But in Seattle, in the same game, their offense is healthy, which means Noah Fant, who's missed the last 2 games, will be active in this one. He is getting back on the field. Noah Fant, probably not going to crack your lineup, but maybe helps out Geno Smith a little bit. In Washington, Austin Eckler, the running back, is out, and that was expected. He's dealing with a concussion, and that means Jeremy McNichols will be the backup. But we were a little worried about Brian Robinson Jr. earlier in the week. He exited last week with an ankle injury multiple times. However, this week in practice, he was upgraded to full by the end of the week. So he's off the injury report. Brian Robinson Jr. is active. He's good to go. And I think he's a clear must start in this offense because Eckler catches a lot of those check down passes, and I don't expect those to go to Jeremy McNichols. McNichols does not really catch anything out of the backfield. So all of that will just go in favor of Brian Robinson. Maybe McNichols vultures a goal line rush, but in general, I think Brian Robinson is a very safe play this week. I think a top 20 option. Despite his injury last week, I think that's the only red flag. I would project 20 plus touches for B-Rob this week. But kicker Austin Seibert, who was banged up earlier in the season, came back briefly, was now placed on IR. He will not suit up this week. He missed that game-tying PAT last week. So maybe that's a big reason why he did miss. He is not fully healthy. In Tennessee, in the same matchup, Tyjae Spears questionable himself with a concussion, and he missed last week, but I do expect him to play. He was full in practice on both Thursday and Friday, so he'll probably clear the protocol. I expect Tyjae to be on the field, and while I'm not starting Tyjae, I think that's a big downgrade to Tony Pollard. The last time we saw Tyjae back on the field when he was healthy, Pollard was seeing closer to a 55-45 touch split. Last week, Pollard saw a lion's share of the workload, and he was pretty good. But with Tyjae in the mix, I don't trust the floor for either player, and they're very touchdown dependent. Against the Commanders, not my favorite matchup in general. So I don't think I'm going to be chasing a Titans running back this week. I think with Tyjae active, I'm probably going to downgrade and bench Tony Pollard. But in Jacksonville, Christian Kirk has been on IR for several weeks now, but Gabe Davis over the bye week was placed on IR. So that means more targets for guys like Brian Thomas Jr. and Evan Ingram. Maybe Brenton Strange would be the only other upgrade in that department. I think other than that, Travis Etienne is the only reliable pass catcher, and even that is not a safe play. So in Jacksonville, kind of a rough situation all around, but because Trevor Lawrence is probably going to suit up, I do think Brian Thomas looks like a safer play. With Lawrence, his non-throwing shoulder has been a sore problem for him. For the last 3 weeks, he has been inactive. But last week was the bye. He's resting up, and he was limited all week in practice. It's not his actual throwing shoulder, so it's just a relative pain tolerance issue, and I think after 3 weeks removed, I think he'll be back on the field. I do trust Lawrence to suit up this week. So while I'm not going to start him against the Texans, I do think Brian Thomas Jr. looks way safer now that Lawrence is active, along with the injuries to the other receivers. But in the running back core, Tank Bigsby is active. He will suit up. We saw him exit a couple weeks ago before the bye against whoever they were facing. But Tank Bigsby makes this backfield pretty questionable to trust. I think in the passing game, I trust the role for Etienne to be there. Bigsby does not catch passes, but he's been way more efficient on the ground this season. Bigsby has been the better fantasy player in general. So I would be worried. I think I'd rather not start either of them. Given the toss-up of who to start all throughout the season, I think this is a bit of an audition for your fantasy lineup. Who will you start in the Jags backfield? Maybe it's Etienne, maybe it's Bigsby, maybe it's neither. This week, I think it's neither. In the same game, though, in Houston, their roster's fully healthy with the exception of Stephon Diggs. If you are planning to start a Texan, they are good to go. In LA for the Rams, Tyler Higbee not quite ready to return. He was ruled out this week against the Saints, but he did start practicing. He was limited on Thursday, and that is a good sign. He suffered a rough knee injury back in the playoffs last season. So Higbee might play this season, but at least in week 13, not quite ready to return. Colby Parkinson is the main player at tight end for LA. In New Orleans, Chris Olave remains on IR dealing with a concussion. Earliest time he would return would be week 14. However, it's his third concussion apparently in the last calendar year, and they may just be cautious given their lack of playoff potential. I could see 2025 as the next time we see Chris Olave. I'm not expecting him to come back anytime soon, which means with Rashid Shaheed on IR, same with Bub Means on IR, Cedric Wilson does have some opportunity. He's active for this game. He's missed a little bit the last few weeks, but off the bye, he will be on the field. I still think the only one I would gamble on, though, would be Marquez Valdez-Scantling, hoping for some play action passes from Derek Carr down the field. So not going to trust anyone in this offense in general other than Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill. However, Jamal Williams is questionable with a groin injury. It looks like he's coming back on the field off the bye week. He was limited Wednesday, Thursday, and then upgraded to full on Friday. So he will be the backup to Alvin Kamara, but I still think Taysom Hill will be the goal line running back. I don't see Jamal Williams being a big problem. And with Kendry Miller on IR, I think you just still trust Taysom a lot at the tight end position in fantasy. In Carolina, Jatavian Sanders, the rookie tight end out of Texas, is out. Same with Ian Thomas, another tight end on the roster, was placed on IR. So Tommy Tremble will get the start. Pretty much all of the snaps at tight end this week go to Tommy Tremble in Carolina. But I don't think I'm starting him. In their backfield, Miles Sanders is on IR, but Jonathan Brooks is pretty unstartable himself. However, Jalen Coker, the wide receiver, is out. So mainly the targets will be going to the receivers Adam Thielen, David Moore, and Xavier Legette. And last week, David Moore was the main benefactor. He was the wide receiver 1. I don't think I trust any Panthers receiver, though, at this point. Legette, I think, is more likely to find the end zone than anyone else, but Thielen may sometime bounce back. Last week, though, suggested Bryce Young trusts David Moore the most. I think I'm passing on all of them in Carolina. In Tampa Bay, they're all healthy with the exception of Chris Godwin, who has been on IR for quite some time. In Philly, Devontae Smith is questionable with a hamstring injury, did not play last week and did not practice on Wednesday, but on Thursday and Friday, both of those days, he was limited, and he is a game-time decision. But according to him, he is not sure if he will play. He sounds a bit pessimistic given that quote. So I would probably account for him not to suit up. I did not rank him at the moment. I'll let you know what my contingent rank on him would be, but at the moment, I think it's a bit too risky to bet on. I'm not fully expecting Devontae Smith to play. So he's a game time decision. There's not really a benefactor other than AJ Brown, Dallas Goedert if he doesn't suit up. In general, the receivers beyond the top 2 are not safe. And Johnny Wilson, the rookie, is questionable with a hamstring injury as well. He was limited on Friday. It happened midweek. He was downgraded. He's now a game time decision. He may not suit up. So perhaps Jahan Dotson gets the most snaps, but probably not enough targets for me to start. In fantasy, I'd probably pass on any backup Eagles receiver. In Baltimore, the Ravens offense is fully healthy, so no concerns there. If you want to start them, go ahead. But in Buffalo, Dalton Kincaid, the tight end, is out. So for the second week in a row, just like a couple weeks before the bye, Dawson Knox is the plug-in in Buffalo. A decent pickup off the wire if you need him. And I do think he's in the streaming conversation, but I'd still probably rather go with a guy like Will Dissly if you can still get him. But Dawson Knox, not bad. He had like 4 for 60, I believe, a couple weeks ago in Buffalo. Keon Coleman, questionable with a wrist injury, limited all week in practice, did not suit up a couple weeks ago either. So trending in the right direction. I do expect Keon to suit up. He's a game time decision. However, not the safest start. I think just a low end flex play given his recent injury concerns. But in the same game with the San Francisco offense, it looks like Brock Purdy is probably going to play. Questionable at the moment with a shoulder injury that kept him out last week. But he was full in practice on Friday after 2 limited practices Wednesday, Thursday, and he is getting healthier. It does look more likely that Purdy will suit up. According to Shanahan, barring a setback, he does expect Purdy to be on the field. So that's good news. Purdy definitely helps out this offense in general. But given the matchup, given the snow and the weather that I'll mention in a bit, I don't think I really trust Purdy that much. Not the best matchup. I really have a hard time trusting Brock Purdy at the moment. I also have a hard time believing he won't get re-injured mid-game. It could crop up again. I have some real concerns with Brock Purdy in fantasy this week. But in general, I think Jauan Jennings and Deebo Samuel do gain some value. Same with CMC and George Kittle. The offense will be a lot better with Purdy instead of Brandon Allen. So that's interesting, but the weather's a problem there. In Denver, Josh Reynolds, I think, will remain on IR because his 21-day window to return will expire after this game on Monday. And that means the bye next week means he doesn't have to actually play until week 15, and I don't expect them to push it. So with that in mind, I think Devon Villay remains the number 2 receiver. I don't expect Josh Reynolds to be back on the field. But midweek, we saw a questionable designation for Bo Nix, but on Friday, he was full in practice. Bo Nix will play on Monday night. So definitely trust him. He's been great in fantasy lately. And lastly, in Cleveland, Cedric Tillman, I did not rank. I'm not expecting him to play. He didn't practice Thursday or Friday with a concussion. And although the game's on Monday, it does not look too good. So I expect him to miss. I'm not going to trust him. There aren't that many good pivots in that late week time window. So on Monday night, if you're trusting Tillman, I think you need Elijah Moore or Devon Villay as a backup. Those are the only players other than maybe David Njoku, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, who are much more rostered, that I think you could get off the waiver wire as a backup. So not going to start Tillman this week. I'm not expecting him to play for the Browns. But those are all of the offensive injuries. The only weather update that really matters is in Buffalo, where there's currently a lake snow effect going on, and it is not expected to end until 7 p.m. on Sunday. That's at least what I saw last I checked Google. I do not live in Buffalo. I can't confirm exactly, but it sounds like there's a shit ton of snow, and it's not expected to stop mid-game. There's still a 20% chance all throughout the night that the snow will continue. It will be exactly 32 degrees, perfect snow temperature, and the wind is also 11 miles per hour. So I don't really think it matters too much for the Bills. They're pretty used to it. I think they'll be all right. However, the Niners, coming from San Francisco, may be so unacclimated that they really lay an egg. All of their injuries combined with the weather have me very concerned for the San Francisco offense. I think they definitely lose this game to Buffalo. So that's the only real weather update to mention. Now that that's out of the way, let's get into my rankings and all of my final decisions over there. We're going to start at running back, where I did make a few decisions. I upgraded James Cook a couple of spots. Given the snow, given the weather, I think they lean on the run game a little bit, and I do think James Cook is a must start. A very good matchup. It ranks top 5 versus the Niners this week. So I would start him for sure. I definitely trust James Cook at the moment. So he jumps Chase Brown and Alvin Kamara. He moves up 2 spots. And I also think Chuba Hubbard should move up 2 spots as well. The matchup against Tampa ranks top 4, and he also plays very well against them. Last season, when he was the starter, in his last 2 games, Chuba Hubbard averaged 16.3 points, an average of 98 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns in those 2 matchups. So he's played well against Tampa in the past. I think it'll continue. I think Chuba Hubbard in a very good matchup is a must start, a top 12 play. I have no concerns about Jonathan Brooks anymore. So he moves up a couple spots. I also think Kyron Williams moves up 3 spots. Kyron Williams feels very due for a big game. He did not catch any passes last week. I think that changes. And last season, when he faced off against New Orleans as well, he went over 100 yards and a touchdown on the ground. So I do trust Kyron this week. I think he's a very good play. It's a top 11 matchup. I upgraded him 3 spots, previously 15, now number 12. So the 2 of them jump Kenneth Walker. He moves down 2 spots, but I kind of see him the same. However, Christian McCaffrey definitely is a safer play with Brock Purdy under center. The offense will definitely move the ball more efficiently, more scoring opportunities, and in general, I think McCaffrey will have more catchable passes when he gets the ball, as well as not as many stacked boxes. I think the offense is not as predictable with Purdy under center. So McCaffrey moves up 6 spots. I do worry about the weather. The matchup's a little below average, but not that bad. McCaffrey moves up from number 20 to number 14, just behind Walker here in the top 14. So I would definitely start him, but he hasn't scored a touchdown yet this season. That's my only concern. I think the floor is safe, but the ceiling is a bit capped. I'm hoping the weather is not too much of a problem, but with all of those players moving up, that means Breece Hall gets jumped. He moves down 3 spots, and other players get pushed down like Pacheco and Jonathan Taylor. I was a bit too high to endorse Pacheco earlier in the week. He only had 8 total touches. He looked good, at least in the second half, but Kareem Hunt was still a big factor. And in general, the Raiders did kind of shut him down early in the game. So Pacheco, that was a bit of a miss by me, but given I had to wait so long, I was just so eager to put him in the lineup. David Montgomery and Bucky Irving get jumped by CMC, so they move down 1 spot, but Brian Robinson Jr. moves in to the top 20. I think with no Austin Eckler, he's a clear must start. He moves up 13 spots. And although I'm a bit concerned he aggravates his ankle injury, has to exit early, I still think Brian Robinson has been so efficient this season, so many touchdowns, I would still trust the floor a lot. So similar to Bucky Irving, I think you have to start him. Brian Robinson, a clear top 20 play with no Eckler this week. So he jumps Aaron Jones. That's why he moves down. Rashad White, I think, is a bit safer than both James Conner and DeAndre Swift. So he jumps the 2 of them, but as B-Rob jumps him, he only moves up 1 spot overall in the rankings. So that's the change there. Rico Dowdle gets pushed down with B-Rob coming in. However, a player I previously had in this tier was Tony Pollard, who I moved down 7 spots given the news that Tyjae Spears is going to be active most likely this week. So I don't trust Pollard at all anymore. I think it's a rough timeshare to trust. And now at number 32, I think I'd rather be benching Tony Pollard than starting him. So no thank you there. I also upgraded Gus Edwards 6 spots overall, now number 30 in the rankings. With no J.K. Dobbins, the touchdown likelihood does go up. We saw that happen for him last week, even though it was the final drive of the game, they still gave Gus Edwards the ball on the goal line. So I still think he's an interesting bet for a goal line opportunity. However, beyond that, I don't trust more than like 50, 60 yards on the ground for Gus Edwards. He's not the most explosive player in general, but I also think Travis Etienne is a lot less safe if Bigsby is active, so I bumped down Etienne 3 spots overall. He's now number 33, and Bigsby moves up 5 spots overall. I have them now back-to-back. I do not know for sure who is the better play in fantasy. I know that Etienne will be catching passes, and with no Christian Kirk or Gabe Davis, maybe that means like 5 targets for Etienne this week. But without that, I really trust Bigsby to get more work on the ground, and that's why neither is a really safe play. I think very touchdown dependent from both of them. I don't love the matchup against the Texans. So I think I'm going to pass on both Jags running backs. I have them back-to-back. We'll see who's actually the better play after this game. But beyond that, after Amir Abdullah, it's nothing but backups with the exception of, I guess, Javonte Williams there at 39. But I did upgrade Ray Davis 6 spots overall because I do see more rush attempts in this snow game in Buffalo. So the running backs I think are safer. James Cook was already a good start, but Davis has some potential. We've seen him be explosive in the past. Maybe another 60-yard touchdown is in the cards for him this week. So I see at least some volume for Ray Davis, not the worst bet. The matchup against San Francisco also ranks top 5. So at 36, I think if you're starting a backup, really desperate off the wire, Ray Davis has some appeal, in my opinion. But the other player who moves up the board would be Antonio Gibson, the last guy I'm going to mention here. He was actually more involved than Ramondre last week. He was more efficient than Ramondre, and I really don't know if it's emblematic of what will happen, but at least I thought I'd mention it. The matchup against the Colts does rank very good. It ranks top 3 against the position. So an upgrade for the Patriots backfield, but a little too unpredictable in terms of volume to trust for sure. But Gibson moves up to number 40, given Ramondre's not the safest bet. If it's going to pivot to anyone else, I think Gibson would be the main benefactor. So those are the updates at running back in terms of my rankings. I did take Eckler and J.K. Dobbins out of the mix. I previously had them roughly around running back 32, 33, something around there. But neither of them will play this week. Those are the running back rankings this week. But at wide receiver, I did make a few changes inside the top 5. I did bump up AJ Brown to number 2. Given the questionable designation for Devontae Smith, I do trust AJ Brown a lot. Justin Jefferson gets a bad matchup on paper, actually. I may be overestimating what he'll actually do, but I do think AJ Brown is a better start than Jefferson, but I'm definitely starting both of them, that's for sure. Outside the top 7, I do think T. Higgins is a must start. When you look into his numbers, he's the wide receiver 2 in scoring the last 4 games, and that includes Jamar Chase on the field. He's averaging 19.4 points per game. So this offense completely runs through the receivers. Chase and Higgins are both top 10 plays. I have Higgins at number 8 this week. And if you look at the matchup stats, actually against the Steelers, T. Higgins has better numbers. Historically, he averages 16.5 points per game, an average of 107 yards per game his last 4 versus the Steelers. Meanwhile, Chase averages 15 points per game in this same divisional matchup. So perhaps the better play is actually T. Higgins this week, but at number 8, that's not a player you're benching. I also upgraded Cooper Kupp. I think Stafford's going to have an excellent game this week. The matchup's really good against the Saints, and I think he's a top 10 play. I think Cooper Kupp is a must start. I bumped him up 3 spots overall. Drake London does get jumped, so he moves down 1 spot. Meanwhile, I looked into the numbers for George Pickens, and I think he's going to have an elite game here against the Bengals. It's off a mini bye week, and in his last 3 games versus Cincinnati, George Pickens averages 19 points per game, an average of 112 yards per game, and 3 receiving touchdowns. He torches this defense. They're also dealing with an injury to DJ Turner in the secondary, and I think Pickens will go off. I think Pickens is going to be a massive ceiling type of play. It's been a while since we've seen him go over like 120 yards. We know he's capable of it. I think this is the week Pickens plays lights out against the Bengals. So upgraded him 6 spots. I think he's a must start. The matchup is good, and historically, he goes over 100 yards in this matchup. So 100% start George Pickens at number 11. I think he's an excellent high-end ceiling type of play. I also upgraded Jackson Smith and Jigba of the Seahawks, because when you look into his numbers, he has been lights out. He actually ranks as the wide receiver 3 over the last 4 games, averaging 19.2 points per game. That's only behind Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. JSN is on fire, an average of 111 yards per game. So I previously had him at 14, now number 12. Definitely start JSN, a must start in my opinion. I also think Courtland Sutton is a true must start at this moment in time. He ranks as the wide receiver 6 in scoring the last month. 17.2 points for Sutton. The matchup's also top 9. I had him 3 spots lower. I think he's a very safe play. I think Sutton is now a lock in your lineup. And that means as they move up, some other players move down. Terry McLaurin moves down a total of 6 spots because the matchup against the Titans ranks bottom 8. Even though they have a lot of injuries on defense in the secondary, they still limit receivers better than most teams. So he moves down a little bit. Last week was a little bit fluky, if not for a Hail Mary-esque type of play in the fourth quarter. Terry, without that house call, was not the same option against Dallas. So you got bailed out without it. A little bit of cracks were showing, and I do think Terry, in a tougher matchup, deserves a downgrade as I look into some upgrades statistically for guys like Pickens, JSN, and Courtland Sutton. So McLaurin at number 14, definitely still a player you're starting, but not top 10 in my opinion anymore. I also think Garrett Wilson deserves to move down a couple of spots. I still view him the same, but given I upgraded a couple other players, he does move down. I also downgraded Mike Evans by 5 spots, and I understand if you disagree with me on the Buccaneers. However, in this matchup, on the road, Mike Evans does not play very well. His last 4 road games at Carolina, he's averaging 10.7 points per game, an average of 5.5 catches, 64 yards, and only 1 touchdown in those 4 games. If you look at his numbers at home in this matchup, he is insanely dominant, an average of 28.3 points, 140 yards per game, 7 touchdowns his last 4 games at home against Carolina. Those are versus Carolina numbers. This game is at Carolina, where he does average less than 11 points. So I am downgrading him a little bit. I think you're still starting him, but I don't expect him to be a top 10 play. I think the matchup is better for Cade Otton this week. But Calvin Ridley, I think, has been so good this season. As of late, really earned my trust. I upgraded him 2 spots. He's now in this tier. He does enter the must-start rankings inside the top 18. And the last player I think is a true must-start alpha number 2 option this week would be Ladd McConkey of the Chargers on the road at Atlanta. The matchup is elite, ranks number 2 against the Falcons, and there's really no other competition in this offense to catch passes. It's other than him, it's really just Will Dissly, and Quentin Johnston probably keeps dropping it, so probably misses out on some targets. So I could see like 12 targets for McConkey this week. I think he will find the end zone. I think there will be a lot of catch-up mode against the Falcons. They will probably be leading in this game. I do think Herbert will have to lean on the pass a lot more, especially if J.K. Dobbins is unavailable. So McConkey, an excellent play, a top 20 play in my opinion. At number 18, I think he is bust proof. In terms of floor, I do project 12 points. Even if he doesn't find the end zone, I think if he does score a touchdown, you might go over 100 yards. You might have an elite 20-plus point game from Lad McConkey this week. Outside the top 18, I think Darnell Mooney in the same game is right behind him. I also upgraded him 3 spots, along with Brian Thomas Jr. If you told me for sure that Lawrence will play, I think Brian Thomas is a absolute must start. I think he'll play very well. He was dominant in the first game against the Texans. In week 4, Brian Thomas had 17.6 points, 9 targets, 6 catches, 86 yards, and a touchdown. That's where he got his reputation early in the season in matchups like this. So I do trust Brian Thomas Jr. a lot. Definitely a good play this week. But Marvin Harrison Jr. does get jumped by him, so he moves down 1 spot overall. But I looked into the numbers for Tank Dell, and I am absolutely telling you to start Tank Dell. He's a elite flex option this week. While there is a little bit of risk, he hasn't been that dominant this season. He normally plays lights out against the Jaguars. If we look at Tank Dell's last 2 games versus Jacksonville, he averages 18.3 points per game, an average of 98 yards per game, and 2 touchdowns in these 2 matchups. So I also looked at CJ Stroud's numbers. Stroud averages like 345 yards per game against Jacksonville as well, along with 2 touchdowns every single time. So I think Nico Collins is going to dominate, but I also think Tank Dell is going to dominate. I think based on these numbers, if Tank Dell is projected for 18 points on average against Jacksonville, he is a must start. I upgraded him 16 spots overall, now to number 22. I can't put him top 20. There's a lot of good options with no teams on bye. Not ready to do that just yet. But at 22, I think he's a high-end flex play. I think the ceiling is wide open for Tank Dell this week. I think he's a very good play in your lineup. And with all these other players bumping up, that means Malik Neighbors still near the top of this tier, but does get jumped 4 spots. He was not bad, but not elite on Thursday. And Zay Flowers, I also decided to drop down 9 spots overall. That's a full tier drop for Zay Flowers. And it's because of this matchup. Although Darius Slay is not going to play, I really do fear both Terrion Arnold and Cooper DeJean. It's the worst matchup you can ask for. The Eagles rank bottom 2 against the receiver position. So really tough spot here. I think Flowers is just a flex play. We've seen him burn you in the past, and I have some legit concerns. I don't think Lamar will be throwing it to Flowers like crazy in this game. I think Flowers will be limited. In general, that's what the Eagles can do to your top receivers. So I bumped him down at number 24. I don't know if Flowers is a true must start, but odds are the upside is too enticing to bench. I do think the risk, though, is definitely a big part of the equation. So he moves down 9 spots, and as Tank Dell jumps these other players, they move down 1 spot. I still view Jamison Williams, DJ Moore, DK Metcalf, Khalil Shakir the same. 2 of those players have already suited up. J-Mo did let you down a little bit. DJ Moore was lights out. Metcalf and Shakir, I think, will be fine. But Hopkins played well. He had about 90 yards on Friday. And given Brock Purdy is going to suit up, I did upgrade Jauan Jennings by 18 spots overall. I think Jennings is way more interesting, way more safer, and definitely meriting some flex consideration. Not the safest play given the weather, but I definitely trust Jennings with Purdy a lot more than Debo. So now he's in the flex conversation at number 30. I think you could start Jennings, but the weather is a bit of a problem. Purdy still not 100% guaranteed to play. But as he moves up, guys like Jerry Jeudy, Jacoby Myers, Jaden Reed do move down. And Michael Pittman, I did downgrade 6 spots overall. I think I was just a little bit too excited about him. Now that I know Pierce will play, Pittman does move down 6 spots overall. His matchup against the Patriots is not the best, and also there have been some rough games for him. He only averages 5.9 points per game in his last 4. Last week was good. He had 12.5 points, but it could burn you again. Pittman is, I don't think, as safe as a guy like Jauan Jennings, who I don't think is that safe in the first place either. So Pittman does move down at 34, a low-end flex play this week. But with Jennings and Tank Dell moving up, that's why these other guys moved down 2 or 1 spot. But I did upgrade MVS, moved him up to 43. I think if you're willing to go with Nick Westbrook-Akine, I think you could pivot to MVS in the same vein as a guy like Xavier Worthy. So in that flyer territory, got to be desperate, but worth a shot. The upside is definitely pretty high. And he does jump Keon Coleman 1 spot, downgrade for him. But Alec Pierce stays put at 45. Deebo Samuel moves up a couple spots. Even with Purdy active, I don't really trust Deebo at the moment. But I did not rank Demarcus Robinson, and this matchup against New Orleans is pretty good. I think he's pretty interesting. We could see more touchdowns for Demarcus Robinson. So didn't rank him, kind of an oversight. Apologies there. He's now at number 47. So still not the safest bet, but an interesting top 50 play. Maybe in DFS, I'd consider it. Devon Valley right behind him. He moves down a few spots against Cleveland. But then in the same game, I have Elijah Moore, who I think would be the backup plan for Cedric Tillman alongside Valley, whoever you want in that matchup. But then Josh Palmer, Quentin Johnston, really good matchup against the Falcons. And with no J.K. Dobbins, they will probably get a few more targets. I think they lean on the pass a bit more in general this week against the Falcons. So Palmer and QJ, kind of the bottom of the barrel. I'd probably pass on them. But outside the top 50, I did rank David Moore of the Panthers at 55. He moves up 10 spots. I was previously forgetting about him earlier in the rankings. So those are all the changes at receiver. This video is running a bit long, so I'm just going to try and speed through this and wrap it up. At quarterback, these are my changes. I upgraded Joe Burrow, who's actually been the quarterback 1 over his last 4 games, an average of 26 points per game. Burrow is elite. I don't think you're benching him. And he doesn't play that terribly against Pittsburgh. While he does have a lot of turnovers against them, he also has a lot of touchdowns, and his record is 3-2. I think he will bounce back with a win. I would be starting Burrow at quarterback 4 this week. I also upgraded CJ Stroud once I looked into his numbers. Holy shit, Stroud dominates this matchup. He has 3 career games versus the Jacksonville Jaguars, and in those 3 games, he averages 25 fantasy points in a 4-point touchdown scoring setting. He averages 310 yards per game, 7 touchdowns. 1 of them is on the ground. Not a single turnover against Jacksonville, along with 26 rushing yards per game. Usually he doesn't contribute on the ground. For some reason against the Jags, he does. So Stroud is dominant. If you get 25 points again from him this week against Jacksonville, that will be an elite play. So I can't quite put him in the same tier as a guy like Bo Nix. I think it's a tier below, but Stroud I think is an elite option. I definitely believe he's a good play this week. He moves up 7 spots in my rankings. That combined with the numbers for Tank Dell in this matchup, a player averaging 98 yards per game. Even Nico Collins averages over 100 yards against the Jaguars. So love this spot for CJ Stroud. I think he's a bust-proof option. I know he's been bad lately, but I think this is the spot where he turns it around. He usually plays elite football against the Jaguars. So I understand if you think I'm too high. He's been bad lately, but I'm trusting the stats on Stroud. I'm bumping him up 7 spots now to quarterback 7 this week. And I looked into the numbers on Kyler Murray. I downgraded him 4 spots. I do not think he's the top 4 option I told you he was back on Tuesday. This matchup is bottom 10, so the Vikings can give him some problems. I still trust him on the ground. I think the floor is still pretty good, but also over his last 4 games, he has only 5 total touchdowns, and that's not that many. He's only the quarterback 16 in scoring. So I actually understand if you'd rather bench Kyler Murray. He's not been that good. The matchup suggests it's a downgrade, but I actually believe that he wins the game. I think he will bounce back in a major way after that Seahawks loss last week. So maybe I'm wrong. I understand if you disagree with me, but I still trust Kyler Murray as a top 10 play this week. At number 8, he's not as good as number 4, like I expected he would be back on Tuesday. But I don't think he's going to be terrible. I still think he's going to be a safe 19 type of point floor in fantasy this week. I would still start Kyler as a top 10 option. But with Stroud moving up, these other players move down 1 spot overall. And when we get to Justin Herbert, I did downgrade him 2 spots because I worry about the offense a little bit without J.K. Dobbins. It's a bit more predictable, and while he will have to rely on the pass a bit more, maybe he does not get to run. Maybe there is a QB spy that previously was more occupied by J.K. Dobbins running some check down routes in the screen game. So maybe Herbert is not as safe. I downgraded him 2 spots. I do not think he'll be as good as Jordan Love, who I did rank at number 13 entering Thursday. He put up about 20 plus points in fantasy on Thanksgiving. So Herbert still a safe play, but a little bit less so this week. I think without Dobbins, the offense struggles a little bit more. They might settle for a field goal. Otherwise, it would have been a touchdown. Herbert moves down 2 spots, but I still think he's a better play than Baker Mayfield, who, wow, you guys really did not like my take on Baker Mayfield. And I understand some of your criticism of my ranking there. I had him at 17. I did upgrade him 2 spots since Tuesday. However, I don't know if he's the best play this week. While the matchup is top 5, I understand if you want to believe that and just start him no matter what. He's in the same tier as Stroud, in my opinion, but this is a big tier. I think you're getting about 18 to 20 points regardless from all of them, and I don't think Baker has the safest projection in general because of these divisional matchup stats. Here is the main reason why I'm not endorsing Baker at an elite rate this week. I understand that Mike Evans is healthy, but against the Panthers, Baker does not play well. Last year in 2 games versus Carolina, he averaged only 170 yards per game, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, and 3 rushing yards in those 2 games, an average of 8.1 fantasy points. That is terrible. So there is some risk here. I think not only is it a division game, it could be low scoring again. The Panthers know Baker pretty well. He was in their building for the better part of a year a couple seasons ago, and I do think they may know some of his weaknesses. I don't think he'll be lights out. While I do like the matchup for Cade Otton this week, I do not like it for Mike Evans. He does not play very well on the road in this matchup either. So I think it's more of a running attack on the goal line. I think similar to last week, we might get a rushing touchdown from both Bucky Irving and Rachaad White. Maybe even Sean Tucker vultures him again. So I worry that Baker doesn't give you more than 1 touchdown this week. I think the floor is fine, but I don't think he's elite. I get it, though, if you still think I'm way too low, but I'm not going to budge that much. I agree I was a little too low. The matchup's better than I gave it credit for, but I still worry about these divisional matchup stats. Baker was terrible against them last season. So good luck with him. At number 15, I think he represents the tier break at the position. I would be trying to bench most quarterbacks after this point, but I'm going to rank Brock Purdy at number 16 this week. I'm worried about his shoulder injury cropping up again. I also worry about the weather. The snow in Buffalo could really limit him, but I didn't rank him back on Tuesday. I had Brandon Allen late in the rankings, so he does move up 17 spots. He was previously unranked, now at number 16. I'd rather pass, though. I think I'd avoid Purdy if I can on Sunday night. He does jump Richardson, who moves down 2 spots, also bumped by Baker Mayfield. And Geno Smith gets a really good matchup here. The Jets have given up a lot of points to the position. So he moves up 2 spots. I think he's a bit safer. I rated him a little too low at 21 earlier in the week. But he jumps Caleb Williams, who had a really good game on Thursday. Sam Darnold, I did downgrade a lot. Against Arizona, it's actually a terrible matchup. The Cardinals rank bottom 2 against the quarterback position in fantasy. So Darnold is a bit tricky. I'd rather bench him if I could, but he does offer some upside on those deep passes to Addison and Jefferson. Maybe Darnold is still fine. At number 20 in a 2 quarterback league, I would still start him. But beyond that point, I'm definitely benching everyone else. Drake May moves down. Will Levis, I think, moves up 2 spots, but still not enough to start. And he does jump Trevor Lawrence, but that's about it. Cooper Rush and Derek Carr get jumped by Levis, Trevor Lawrence, as well as Brock Purdy. So those are my quarterback rankings. Now let's move on to tight end, where I didn't make any changes inside the top 15. However, I did have to remove Dalton Kincaid and Jatavian Sanders, both top 20 tight ends previously, and that means Evan Ingram does move up 5 spots. After looking into this matchup with no Gabe Davis, I would expect a few more targets for Evan Ingram. Knowing Lawrence is active as well is a big upgrade. So he moves up 5 spots. I think Ingram at number 16 is a little more interesting, but Will Dissly is in the same vein. I think that's kind of the cutoff point in terms of streaming tight ends. Dissly moving up 2 spots at 17 is the cutoff for me. But with no Kincaid, I think Dawson Knox does crack the top 20 at number 20 exactly. He moves up 11 spots, previously unranked outside the top 30. But other than that, it's pretty much all the same. No real changes. There's no backup tight end in Carolina that I'd be interested in starting. No thank you, Tommy Tremble. So that's it at tight end, pretty straightforward. But at defense, I did make a few changes. I did downgrade the Bills 4 spots, knowing that Brock Purdy will play. The snow's still a factor, and I still think the Niners offense will kind of struggle, so I don't trust them that much. I still think the Bills are a good floor play. At number 6, I would think they're worth starting this week. But the Colts, I did swap with the Commanders. I bumped them up 1 spot. The Commanders down 1 spot themselves. And then outside the top 16, all of these you're benching. But the Jaguars versus Houston, once I looked into the numbers against Stroud owns them. The Jags are not safe at all. The Chargers also moved them down. I think Kirk Cousins plays very well, and you're not starting them. But the Panthers and Cardinals and Vikings do move up at least 2 spots, as these other teams do move down. So I did change my opinion on them. That's going to be it for all of the rankings updates. Here on the screen are my top 20 quarterback, tight end, and defensive rankings this week. So here it is on the screen. Go ahead and pause it if you need it. And then now, here are my flex rankings overall at running back and wide receiver. The top 40 at both positions. I think the top 28 receivers are all very safe. I would expect at least 9-10 points from all of them. I think if you have any in the top 18, they're all must starts. I would trust a high end floor, at least 12-13 points from all of those receivers inside the top 18. But once you hit Nick Chubb and Devontae Adams, I think you're kind of comparing the same type of players, and they're all a bit riskier outside the top 20 at running back and outside the top 30 or so at receiver. So if you still have any questions, let me know in the comment section, but I think these tier break indicators are pretty straightforward, and that's going to be it for showing you the rankings. But lastly, I am making one last update to my win-loss picks. Nothing straight up. I'm keeping with the same picks, but I will mention I'm a bit shocked that you guys are taking the Chargers at a 70% rate over the Falcons. I'm on side of the Atlanta Falcons. I think off the bye, they will win. With no J.K. Dobbins, I do worry about it. But that's what you guys think. At 70%, you are on side of the Chargers. But interestingly, the Seattle Seahawks are 88% favorites. However, the Vegas line has them only favored by 1 point. So that's the big update here. I am taking the Seattle Seahawks -1 against the spread. I'm going to remove the Carolina Panthers +6. That line has not changed since the beginning of the week, and it does feel a bit risky. Maybe the Buccaneers do indeed win by over a touchdown. So I'm going to scrap the Panthers +6. I'm going to swap it out with the Seahawks +1, and then I'm also going to ignore the Jaguars +5.5. I got a bad feeling now that I look at CJ Stroud's numbers. I don't fully trust the Jaguars to cover that spread. Although the number did drop down to +3.5, they are not as deep underdogs anymore. I don't think it's the safest bet. I do think Buffalo is a good bet. I think they will dominate the Niners in the snow on Sunday night. So I'm going to take Buffalo -6 instead of Jacksonville +5.5. I do think that is a safer bet, in my opinion. So these are my picks against the spread. Arizona +4, Atlanta +5. I already took Miami +3.5. That was a bad call. That one was wrong. But Tennessee +6, Seattle +1, and Buffalo -6 are my picks against the spread. That's going to be it for me in this video. It went a bit longer than most Saturday videos, but I did have to update a lot of my rankings. Apologies. Earlier in the week, I was kind of scrambling. I was short on time in general, but we're back. We're going to be back to the same schedule next week, and thank you for bearing with me during the holiday. But hope you had a good Thanksgiving. Hope you have a good Week 13. I hope you win. It's almost crunch time, one of the last chances we have to get that playoff spot. I hope you win. I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.